Hello, my dear students. Welcome back to my channel. This is the module number 11 or chapter 13 of our lecture. So it's about the preparation for the Philippine Commonwealth. So I want to share with you my PowerPoint presentation. Chapter 13, the preparation for the Philippine Commonwealth. So, in relation to the plan of the President William McKinley, he established two commissions. First is the Excursion Commission, and the second one is the Taft Commission. So, as preparation for the Philippine Commonwealth or an American-sponsored government. So, later we will discuss what we call Philippine Commonwealth. Okay, so the Cooper Act or the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, or also known as we're going to discuss first the Cooper Act or the Philippine Organic Act of 1902. So Congressman Henry A. Cooper authored the Philippine Organic Act of 1902. The approval of the act concurred with the official end of Philippine-American War. It's also known as the Philippine Bill of 1902. So the Philippine Organic Act provided for the creation of an elected Philippine Assembly after the following conditions were met. First, the cessation of the existing insurrection in the Philippine Islands. Number 2 is the completion and publication of the census. And the third one is 2 years of continued peace and recognition of the authority of the United States of America after the publication of the census. So after the meeting of the assembly, legislative power shall then be vested in the bicameral legislature composed of the Philippine Commission as the upper house and the Philippine Assembly as the lower house. So the supervision of the island was assigned to the War Department's Bureau of Insular Affairs. So the first census in the Philippines was in 1591 during the Spanish time. It was based on tributes collected and generated about 666,700 people in the islands. But in the year 1799, Filipino population was estimated 1,502,574 to be exact. So however, the first official census in the Philippines was carried out by the Spanish government pursuant to the royal decree calling for the counting of persons living as of the midnight of December 21, 1877, a count of 6,984,727 has been recorded. So the first census conducted by the U.S. military forces took place in 1903 to fulfill the Public Act 467, which was approved by the United States Philippine Commission on October 6, 1902. A total of 7,635,426 Filipinos were recorded as inhabitants of the Philippines. So, how about the Jones Law? So, what is Jones Law? Congressman William Jones authored the bill this bill which replaced the Philippine Organic Act of 1902. And actually, the Jones Law is also known as the Philippine Autonomous Act of 1916 or Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916. It was another organic act passed by the United States Congress. And the said law acted as a constitution of the Philippines from its enactment until the Tydings McDuffie Act was passed in 1934. So the Jones Law created the first fully elected Philippine legislature. So the law was enacted by the United States Congress for the formal commitment of the United. The Jones Law was the framework for the more autonomous government with certain privileges reserved to the United States to protect its sovereign rights and interests in preparation for the grant of independence by the United States. And the law also changed the Philippine legislature into Philippines' first fully elected body, and therefore made it more autonomous of the U.S. government. Okay? Elections were held on October 3, 1916 to the newly created Philippine Senate, and election to the Philippines Assembly had already been held on June 6, 1916, and those elected automatically became members of the House of Representatives. Okay? What else? How about Hare-Hawes-Cutting Law? Okay? Hare-Hawes-Cutting Law or the Hare-Hawes-Cutting Act was enacted on January 17, 1933. It was the first U.S. law passed that set a process and date of the Philippines to gain independence from United States. Okay? So, this law was the result of the Osrox mission led by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Rojas. Okay? And the following, the law stated the following. Number one, America will give independence after 10 years. Okay? Number two, they will give establishment several military and naval bases for the United States. And number three, there will be a imposition of tariffs and quotas on Philippine imports. So, the act was authored, or the Hare-Hawes-Cutting Act was authored by South Carolina Representative Butler Hare, Missouri Senator Harry Bartor House, and New Mexico Senator Bronson M. Cutting. So it was passed by the United States Congress in December 1932, but was vetoed by United States President Herbert Hoover. The Congress overrode the veto on January 17, 1933. So the Philippine Senate was required to ratify the law, with leaders such like Manuel L. Quezon opposing the bill, and the Philippine Senate rejected the bill. So, what is the what they call resident commissioners? So, Benito Legarda and Pablo Ocampo were the first two Filipino resident commissioners sent to Washington. So, other Filipinos who occupied this position included Manuel L. Quezon, Jaime de Beira, Teodoro Yanco, Isaro Gabaldon, and Camilo Ocias. So, what do you mean by Tydings McDuffie Law? So this Tydings McDuffie Law is also known as the act, officially the Philippines Independence Act, or also known as the Philippines Independence Act of 1934. So it was enacted on March 24, 1934, authored by the two members of the Democrats, Senator Millard Tydings of Maryland and Representative John McDuffie of Alabama, and signed into law by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. So the act mandated the following. Number one, U.S. recognition of independence of the Philippine Island as a separate and self-governing nation after 10 years transition period. So this transition period is what we call the Commonwealth transition government, wherein during this 10-year transition period, the United States will train all the Filipinos how to become independent country. Okay, so the second one is the act allowed the U.S. to maintain military forces in the Philippines and to call all military forces of the Philippine government into U.S. Military service. Number three, the act empowered the U.S. President within 2 years following independence to negotiate matters relating to the U.S. naval reservations and fueling stations in the Philippine Islands. So the act reclassified all Filipinos, including those who were living in the United States, as aliens for the purposes of immigration to America. A quota of 50 immigrants per year was established. So before this act, Filipino were ratified or classified as United States nationals but not United States citizens. And while they were allowed to migrate relatively freely, they were denied naturalization rights within the U.S. unless they were citizens by birth in the mainland America. So, Senate President Manuel Quezon headed the Philippine Independence Mission in Washington, D.C. in 1934. So after the Osrox mission and successfully lobbied in the U.S. Congress and secured the passage of law, in 1935, as a result of Tydings McDuffie Law, the 1935 Constitution of the Philippines was drafted and became law. So establishing the Commonwealth of the Philippines with an elected executive and president of the Philippines. So the 1935 Philippine election for the Philippine Commonwealth. So to fulfill the mandate of Tydings McDuffie Law of 1934, the Philippine general election was the first general election of the Commonwealth of the Philippines in 1935. This was also the first direct election of the president of the Philippines and the vice president of the Philippines. Position created in accordance by the 1935 Constitution. Moreover, members of the National Assembly of the Philippines, which replaced the Philippine legislature, were also elected. So there are three parties during that time. Okay, first is the Nationalista Party. The Nationalista Party had a dilemma between their two candidates as to who can be their party standard bearer for the presidency and for vice presidency. Both had the intention to run as president. A party convention was made for official selection for Manuel L. Quezon, the Senate President from Tayabas, and Sergio Osmeña, the Senate pro tempore from Cebu. So on June 15, 1935, the Nationalista Party concluded that and named Manuel L. Quezon as their candidate for presidency and Sergio Osmeña for the vice presidency. And Osmeña accepted his party decision. Okay? How about another, we have another party which is National Socialist Party. So prior to the incoming election, General Emilio Aguinaldo founded the National Socialist Party in 1934. He announced his candidacy for president on June 2, 1935, with his running mate Raimundo Melisa. Mr. Melisa was a former governor of Iloilo. So their candidacy was also supported by the organization Veteranos de la Revolucion, formed during the administration of Governor General Leonard Wood by remaining Filipino veterans of the Philippines Revolution and the Philippine-American War. So the next party during that time, or the other party during that time, is the Republican Party. So on June 19, 1935, Bishop Gregorio Aglipay announced his candidacy for presidency of the Philippines. He revived the Republican Party only for his intention to run for the 1935 election. His political party was organized since 1904 but collapsed in 1907. His running mate during that time was Roberto Nabong from Partido Komunista ng Pilipinas. So who is or the independent candidate? Actually, who is Bishop Aglipay? What is independent candidate? Okay, who is under the independent? Who is under the independent candidate? Pascual B. Racuyal, a mechanic in profession, was a Filipino weird and aspirant for the Philippine presidency. According to some historians, there were questions as to Racuyal's mental stability. Among these promises included that if he be elected to the presidency, he will construct roads out of plastic to prevent their further deterioration. He filed his candidacy on the 1935 election. On the 1953 election, he invited Manila Mayor Arsenio Lacson as his running mate until 1986 to the Marcos Aquino snap election. But he was disqualified in 1986 and he was declared a nuisance candidate. Okay. So the result of the presidency during the 1935 election are as follows. Who became the president? The president that time, that vote of about around 68% is for president is Manuel L. Quezon. Second is Emilio Aguinaldo, Gregorio Aglipay, and Pascual Racuyal. So for the vice presidency, 87% of votes ay nakuha or got by Sergio Osmeña of Nationalista Party. So That is the result of the 1935 election. So for the next video, I'm going to discuss with you about the chapter 14, how the Philippine Commonwealth government how the American ran the Philippine government here in the Philippines. Okay. I hope you take down notes, some information and some details. See you for the next video. Bye-bye.